So, welcome everybody to Rogue Reads, the monthly Zoom cast by the Rogue Women Writers. We're so happy to have you here. It's great to see, the audience returning monthly and growing, and I know how much you enjoy our authors, so I am going to get to the stellar lineup sooner rather than later. Tonight, we are very, very lucky to have Meg Gardiner on, Jeff Abbott on, GABINO IGLESIAS on, and Dan Fesperman on with their brand new titles. And I'd like to kick off the night. I was going to read you about the titles. I think instead I'll do a short bio for each author and then let each of you authors share your favorite log line, your favorite description, your favorite kind of pitch for the novel. And if you're sick of sharing those, just tell us about each title. So tonight we have with us Meg Gardiner, who is the Edgar-winning novelist of multiple thrillers that have been bestsellers in the U.S. and internationally. They've been translated into more than 20 languages. Fast-paced and full of twists, her books have been called Hitchcockian by USA Today, nail-biting and moving by The Guardian. Dan Fesperman first began writing about dangerous and mysterious people and places as a foreign correspondent and a journalist, a newspaper career that culminated in his years for the Baltimore Sun. Reporting from Europe and the Middle East, he covered 3 wars, while also finding the time to write his first 3 novels. Jeff Abbott is the New York Times bestselling author of 21 novels of suspense. They have been summer reading picks chosen by the Today Show, Good Morning America, the Oprah Magazine, and USA Today. And GABINO IGLESIAS is a writer, journalist, professor, and literary critic, the author of 3 novels, his latest just out, and his work has been nominated twice for the Bram Stoker Award, as well as a Locus Award, and it's won the Wonderland Book Award for Best Novel in 2019. So welcome to all our authors. Meg, tell us about your latest, Heat 2.
Okay, well, here we go. This was out Tuesday in the United States, Heat 2. It is a prequel and sequel to the film Heat, which I have co-written with Heat's writer and director, Michael Mann. And it explodes the story that we got a glimpse of in the iconic crime film into the years before and after the events there. So it's a pedal to the metal thriller. It's an epic. It spans decades and continents. I'm extraordinarily proud of it. And I'll leave it there with that and let everybody else get going.
Well, we're going to get the prequel sequel thing, especially. We're going to get into that. It's fantastic. But Jeff, tell us about, give us your favorite for Traitors' Dance, latest Sam novel. I mean, I'd like to hear your take on it.
Well, I'm blurring my background, so it's blurring the book. But Traitors' Dance is the first it's the 6th Sam Capper novel, but it's the first one in about 5 years. And I've moved his story 10 years ahead in time. So instead of being the single father of a toddler, he is now the single father of a 13-year-old and trying to be a suburban dad while at the same time being a secret agent for a very secret intelligence agency. And he's enjoying his sort of dual life. His son, of course, has no idea what he does. But then he gets the assignment that the last American who defected to Russia has vanished from Russia and appears to be headed back to America, which of course seems completely an insane decision to make. So Sam is charged to find this traitor and bring him in. And while that is happening, his teenage son Daniel is being drawn into a mystery of his own. So that's all I'll say on that.
Later, I want to get into that leap in time because I found that fascinating. But GABINO, tell us about The Devil Takes You Home, your favorite description of it, or the heart description of this book, which I feel like came from your heart.
I failed once again to write a middle grade. So instead, I ended up writing about a father, a man, regular Joe, who works at an insurance company, and he gets his daughter gets very sick, And in this country, when someone in your family gets very sick, you better be very rich or you're going to end up suffering a little bit, not just emotionally and psychologically, but also financially. So to keep it really short, his life crumbles. And when your life crumbles, you usually get a little desperate, which leads him into a life of crime. And in that life of crime, he goes across the border trying to steal a couple $1 million from the cartels, which if you're listening to this, you should never do. Don't mess with the cartels. And then sprinkle in some supernatural stuff. And it's a road trip sort of mayhem crime horror novel.
Road trip mayhem and horror. That's a great description and not one what I would have come up with. So Dan, winter work, give us your favorite summation of the book.
Well, it's set a few months after the Berlin Wall has just come down. And the main character, Emil Grimm, is he works for the Stasi, the notorious Stasi, but he's on the foreign intelligence side. And he's about to get his last paycheck in 2 weeks, and everything he's ever worked for has pretty much vanished overnight. And he was already starting to question how they sort of fell short of the slogans anyway. And So what developed on the ground in Berlin at that time was this intelligence free-for-all in which all of the Stasi's secrets were suddenly up for grabs. The United States wanted them, Great Britain wanted them, every intelligence service wanted to look at them. The KGB hoped to kind of keep them quiet. And all of these agents who had worked for them, either in NATO headquarters or in West Germany, were suddenly wondering who they would be working for next, or if they were going to have to go to ground. And with all these secrets up for grab, Emil is in a bit of a dangerous position. He's worried about being prosecuted. And his last covert operation, which he was trying to work on with a friend, is also in danger because that friend has just been found dead just down the trail from where he is escaped to up in the woods just north of Berlin.
So I love these descriptions because they allow me to ask this question that I really want to ask. I hope it's not too hardball. I wonder how many in the audience picked up on their wonderful parallels between these four books. This is how I formulated it. There's a very cool parallel between each of these books. Governments, institutions, and systems all fall under each author's wise scalpel. Speak to it. You want me to repeat it? Governments, institutions, and systems. And in a way, I mean, with each novel, I think you really are dealing with, they're thrillers. We all love thrillers here, but they're very important, topical, timely books. And I would actually like to hear from each author about how that dimension plays out in their latest work. So anybody can take it. If you all talk over each other, I'll slice you up. You can go alphabetically.
Sure. I'll start. He too. It's about cops and robbers. People on both sides of the law. The lawmen, and there mostly are lawmen in the first part of the book anyway, and the outlaws here. And it's about the distinctions, the parallels. One is one group works within the system of the Chicago Police Department and the LAPD, and it's pretty clear that Vincent Hanna, who's the cop, who's one of the protagonists in Heat 2, is driven not by the urge to protect and serve, but by his compulsion and passion and obsession to hunt the most dangerous people into the most dangerous places he can find them. It's the chase that gives his life purpose. And he is completely aware that to do that with some power behind him and color of law, that he's going to be a cop. He does have a moral pole that he's not going to let innocent people die. But he is also embedded in the Chicago Police Department, which in the 80s, which he's completely aware that the Chicago government can function extremely well. But he says that the corruption is meritocratic, that everybody has the right, every citizen has the right to bribe a cop. It's not like Southern California where you need to be Standard Oil. So it's he's aware of all the ways people cut corners and use the system to their own advantage. Opposing him are the people in the Highline robbery crew run by Neil McCauley and Chris Shiherlis, who figure out how to undermine. They need the system so they can undermine it and get around it. If diamonds were free, they wouldn't want to go in after, unmounted stones or bearer bonds or things like this, but they are living big, daring lives, taking down big scores in the early part of the book. Later on, after the events of Heat, which ends with a bank robbery going wrong and turning downtown Los Angeles into a war zone, Chris Shiherlis escapes to South America, where he discovers an entirely other realm of crime that is expanding across borders. He lives in a free trade zone and realizes that means everything is free, and you are who you make yourself to be if you are daring and possibly violent enough. So it's about how he sees the beginning of new systems of international crime as the turn of the millennium comes up.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great response. Okay, let's kick it back to Jeff and your suburban dad, but there's really another level to it as well.
Well, he's Sam, as people who have read the earlier books know, Sam's wife betrayed the CIA. Generally, historically, when your spouse has done that, you knew about it. And if you also worked for the CIA, you might also lose your job or face consequences. But he didn't know, and he proved that he didn't know, and he proved his innocence. But really kind of the only intel agency he can work for is one called Section K, which is where the people who are kind of screw-ups or don't quite fit in or have had issues get given jobs where if it's easier to disavow them if something goes wrong. And so that is where he has chosen to work. And when he starts hunting this guy named Marcus Bolt, who fled to Russia 13 years ago and betrayed not only agents in the US, but in our allies. And now the Russians don't want it known that he's vanished from underneath their wing. And so he's facing a lot of pressure to resolve this quietly. And when he goes to Miami, where he thinks Bolt may have bolted, pardon the pun. Of course, you have to name a guy who's on the run, Bolt. It was required. But he starts getting into the past relationships of people who worked in the CIA and worked with this man. And you start to find, I think, Le Carré and other spy writers have done a much greater job of this, but that is its own landscape, its own territory of betrayals that happen, not betrayals of nations, but betrayals of heart and betrayals of emotion and betrayals of friendship. So that to me was, the government is only as dysfunctional as the people who are running it, right? So feels like that's a lesson that we've learned. But that is sort of where I think I leaned in terms of what the government is, the government involvement is. So
yeah,
I'll send it back to you, Jenny.
Well, thank you. No, that's a great answer too. And just very quickly, I saw a question pop up in the chat from a reader about whether Section K, that arm, is
not a real thing.
Not a real thing.
It hides behind a federal government called the Federal Analysis of Information Office, which supposed job is to help agencies do more with their data, and it's just a front. I mean, there are some statisticians working there, but it's a front. It's not real.
Fascinating. Okay. Dan, so I don't know, at the Stasi or that time period, I mean, institutions failing, and maybe you could almost see them as succeeding at the top of succeeding in the best way possible, failing in the best way possible. What do you think of this question? I mashed it up. But.
Well, the Stasi was pretty much disappearing at that point. What was interesting was the inability of the CIA to keep pace with history at that point. They were in such a rut due to the Cold War that when everything changed literally overnight, they took an incredibly long time. They took months to really adjust properly to what that meant for them on the ground. They were still wary about going into East Berlin because they'd done so poorly there. And so when they did start trying to reach these Stasi people in the book and in real life, what happened was they were going about it in a very ham-handed way. They were literally making cold calls like Florida boiler room salesmen and getting hang-ups and brought in extra people. And then they started visiting them door to door, which didn't go a whole lot better. And they were offering them deals, for the higher ranking people, condos and warm weather climates and new identities. But they were caught so off guard by this that they really didn't have a strategy at all for going after all this information that they eventually pursued a little bit more smartly. But at first, it was kind of a comedy of errors. And that was a real institutional failure, as I said, to keep pace with history.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing to think of how long ago it was and how short ago it was. And,
yeah.
Neat the way you brought it to life. So, Gabino, you touched on this. I think it's something that nobody in this country, wealthy or poor, can fail to at least be aware of, I hope. So, how did you engage with the topicality and the timeliness of your institution, or lack thereof?
I think it's safe to say I don't like the government much, and that goes for government in general. But it's a flawed system, or I should say a flawed collection of systems, from taking rights away from women to the way that we treat immigrants to the current teacher shortage that we're encountering to all our healthcare system. I think we saw a lot of those really profound flaws through the pandemic, but they've been around all along. And I think the closer you get to the bottom rung of society, the bigger and the more menacing they look. So as this guy, as Mario goes through life and he just completely crumbles, then he starts noticing that racism might have been a little worse than he thought, and unemployment was a little worse than he imagined it, and not having health insurance, and receiving phone calls and emails and texts from the hospital about paying his bills. It just brings the point home. It's very, very flawed. And I think crime fiction allows us to talk about all those things like probably no other genre, unless you're doing nonfiction and then just putting it out there the way it is, or straightforward journalism. So I thought I could have all the fun in the world murdering people and talking about guns and creatures and adventure, and at the same time point to those flaws from the perspective of a guy who's suddenly realizing, oh God, this is the land of opportunity, but it's full of potholes. So let me see how I can get through this whole thing.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, about the more menacing on the lower rung of the ladder, like that. So a little bit lighter, Meg, he too, I think most of us know, if not all, is an incredible collaborative project with one of our greatest filmmakers of all time. I don't know if there's anybody whose life has not been touched by something Michael Mann did in the media, and we are all agape to know, how did it happen? How did it come about?
Michael had wanted for many years to expand the world of Heat before and after, and was interested in writing it as a novel. And he's an extraordinarily accomplished writer, and it's all his work had been on the screen. So he had never written a novel, and we do have the same literary agent who introduced us. Michael read my novel Unsub, and we started talking about what we could do together to bring his vision to life, and hope that our skills would complement each other's, and we'd end up with something greater than the sum of its parts. And it was daunting, challenging, and an extremely exhilarating experience to get a chance to work with him and bring something something that's become iconic to expanded life.
And to life in a whole different medium. I mean,
I've written a lot of novels, but I've never collaborated. So kind of like circling each other and scoping each other out for a little bit to figure out how we were going to work, kind of like, the Captain Kirk and the creature in the pit and Star Trek. It all worked out great. It worked out great because he's so skilled. He had such a strong sense of story structure and the drama, the lives of these people who he's been thinking about for decades now. And he's known as a really exacting director, that he wants things done a certain way, and he wants you to do it to that standard. He's known for all the incredible research he does, and that legend is definitely accurate. I will say I was delighted to find out that as a collaborator, he was generous and open-minded, and we would talk about he'd had a basic idea for where the story was going to go, but he was happy to let me take a crack at turning the ideas into scenes, into acts in the story, and then the further we went, the more enmeshed it all became, with swapping chapters back and forth, or pages, or scenes, or getting another phone call with like the third paragraph on page 273. How about this? So it was exhilarating.
Intense and exhilarating. So you're quoted in the New York Times as saying that you guys, there was not a word in the book that you didn't discuss, revise, hash out. And I mean, I think you've answered this a little bit, but I'll ask for more detail, because I think it's just fascinating. Like, how did that play out? So sometimes you're sending scenes back and forth, but what would the workday feel like on such an intensely collaborative sort of endeavor?
Well, there were weeks when we were each working separately, and then I'd ship him off some stuff, and he'd send back 5 pages of notes, or he'd say, okay, these 2 chapters, I think I'm not going to touch, or let's tear this whole thing out and try again. So after, the project took 2 years basically from the first time we spoke about it until the book was published. So in all that time, yes, we both went over every word in the story.
That is fascinating. Okay, I will probably get to some more individual, like Meg's process questions, but Jeff, so I feel as if domestic drama and action suspense kind of are good words that describe your work from way, way back, but Traitor's Dance, maybe never more so. And so I wanted to ask you if you see yourself as genre blending or genre bending, or does that not apply? Do you not believe in genre? Some of our authors on Rogue Reads don't even like the term genre.
I'm not bothered at all by the term genre. I don't mind being a genre writer. I don't mind being an airport writer. I'm just glad to be read and to have people be interested in the book. So that's something I let other people worry about. I don't think I'm really genre bending. I feel like with the early Sam books, my favorite characterization of Sam was Jason Bourne with a baby Bjorn, because I gave him a small child, an infant to deal with, but he was a single dad, and he would go off on his missions, and he didn't really interact with his son. But we've entered this period of storytelling where duality has really sort of asserted itself, right? The unassuming young forensic scientist in Dexter is a serial killer who hunts other serial killers. That nice couple in Falls Church that own a travel agency are Soviet spies and the Americans, and waging a private war on American soil. The chemistry teacher in Breaking Bad is just trying to fund his cancer fund and becomes, an incredible criminal overlord. So the idea of being, a suburban dad who goes off and does missions for America or for the government, and then has to get back and help his son with the history report, just sort of appealed to me, that it seemed like a natural progression for where I wanted Sam to go. So I do feel like it's a little bit different than the previous 5 Sams, because he owns these bars all over the world. Every book was a different city where he owned a bar. It was important that I went and I did the research into the bar scene for each of those cities so I could write truthfully about it. But after the last Sam, I wrote 4 suburban suspense novels that were set here in a fictitious Austin suburb called Lake Haven. I live in a suburb called West Lake Hills, so make of that what you will. But I do feel like sort of the suburban suspense of people with these sort of Facebook curated lives, and everything's invested in the lives that they're living in this sort of American dream. And then this is colliding with the danger that Sam faces, the danger he could possibly bring home to his family if what he does is discovered. To me, that just set up this sort of incredible dramatic tension, and I want him to have to deal with this with his son. His son doesn't know. His son believes a lot of things about his own mother that aren't true. He doesn't have the facts on what his mother did. And so it's, to me, I guess there is some blending of genre going on, but to me, there's still primarily suspense novels. I think that's a really big, broad umbrella that a lot of things can live under. So,
Yeah. I mean, but it's amazing because some of the dialogue feels like it could come right out of an ordinary kitchen night, at a dad's house.
I have an ordinary kitchen. My
Right.
kids are well past middle school, but I do recall some of the discussions and things that I've discussed with them. So
Right, the kind of dad suspense. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And it's interesting, I know, for our readers and writers too, to hear the discussion of genre. So I'm glad you don't object to the term. I like it myself. So Gabino, you touched on the pandemic a little bit in your earlier response. And I guess I would like to ask you, in terms of The Devil Takes You Home, from what I read, it is a novel that the pandemic played a real role in it. It touched a creative spark in you. And of course, the pandemic horrifying and, destroyed so many lives. And I guess I wanted to ask you about that juxtaposition of the painful period, and yet that you were able to write this, novel that everybody is seeing as, this elevation of noir during such a horrifying time in our near history, not even history yet.
I was teaching high school at Idea Montopolis in Austin for 2 years. So it probably took me 2 years to write the first 40,000 words of that novel. And then in March of 2020, just as the pandemic was raging, I was let go. And then obviously I couldn't find a job because there were no jobs during the pandemic. No one was hiring. No one knew what was going to happen with teachers come August. It was a really weird, really strange time. And yeah, everybody and their dog were losing their jobs. So right around July, I decided to stop panicking about finding a job, which wasn't happening, and it wasn't good for my mental health. And I needed to do something. I was cooped up. I was angry. I was afraid. What to do? Let me finish the novel. So between July and October of 2020, I did nothing but write and finished the novel, sent it off, and here we are. But I don't think if the pandemic hadn't happened, I would probably be finishing it now, because it's really hard to have 2 jobs and also write. So I was also teaching a class at Southern New Hampshire University's online MFA. So yeah, between life in general and 2 jobs, one of them full-time as a teacher, teaching 4 different classes, it wasn't conducive to finishing a lot of projects. And the pandemic came along, and as horrible as it was, and as horrible as it still is, I think it was an opportunity to, do the thing, sit down. You have nowhere to go. You're not traveling. You're not working. There's no excuses now. So close the door, turn on the music, and pour it all out. Let it all come out into the novel in very therapeutic way, and it paid out. I'm no longer looking for a teaching job, so it paid out.
So silver lining, if that's not. But so time-wise, I completely get what you're saying and the intensity of focus and just giving you that time. Do you feel as if, in a way, it's not, but it is a pandemic novel, in that without that crisis in the world and in your life, this particular novel, The Devil Takes You Home, would not have been? I know it was born before and 40, half of it written, but do you feel like there's like some inextricable sort of link to the events of the world?
Definitely, and especially because of the critiques to our healthcare system. They were in there slightly from the beginning, but it was less than. I had probably 35-40% of the novel written. So the pandemic changed it. The pandemic infused those critiques with a lot of anger and grief and fear, because as soon as you lose your main job, you also lose your health insurance. So I was thinking, what happens now if I get sick? What's that going to do to my life? And every morning I would check the news and I would read about, man in Houston gets a $400,000, bill from the hospital from having COVID for 2 weeks. So it is, in a way, it is a pandemic novel that doesn't deal with the pandemic, but the feeling of that time and the uncertainty and the grief and the fear and the anger and the oh my God, nothing works. All of that went into the novel. I don't think it would have taken a road as dark as it took if it weren't for the pandemic, and I was still working full time while I tried to finish it. Yeah,
the anger is really palpable. Thank you. So Dan, one journalist refers to the machinery of espionage as part of the backdrop of winter work, and I'm wondering if you, especially as a former foreign correspondent and journalist, can talk about this sort of brutal and cold and I don't even know what, falling apart period of time that maybe some of our readers don't know about.
Well, it was actually seen as a time of great hope, because the Cold War supposedly was coming to an end. And I don't think anybody could foresee at that point how positions would harden again between the United States and Russia. For Germany, it was a time of reunification. There was still a lot of euphoria, and East Germans weren't really dealing with the problem yet of, as bad as the system was. They also had guaranteed housing. They started to get a little insecure about that. So it was, and for people like Emil, who were working for this, for the Stasi, he wasn't on the domestic side, so he wasn't involved in all of that horrible surveillance where you had basically a nation of 17 million people and 1 million of them were acting as informants at one time or another. He wasn't really a part of that, but he had already long ago realized that, the system was kind of rotting from within in that aspect, that they were snooping on each other too much. He didn't trust his bosses, as many people in institutional jobs will eventually end up. And he felt like it was time for a change, but it all came so rapidly and they were all caught so off guard. But as I said, in the West, it was a time of hope, maybe squandered opportunities there. But for Berlin, I lived in Berlin from 93 to 96, and it wasn't long after this period. And it was still a period when East Germans were sort of grappling with these new realities in their lives, and West Germans were starting to be kind of resentful, like why is all my money going to fix up this country that we were enemies with for 40 years? So some of that resentment was starting to come out. Some of the euphoria was starting to wear out. But Berlin was also a very hopeful place at that time. Squatters had moved into all these empty buildings in East Berlin. Artists were taking up residence. It was a chaotic, interesting, really wonderful time in a lot of ways, because the center of the city, the old center of the city that had sort of still been ruins, really, either due to the death strip of the wall or unrepaired damage from the Second World War, it was taken over by a lot of young, exuberant people. And I got to live through that. And so I also tried to inject some of that into the book, this feeling of hope that maybe we can finally get it right in this city that has been at the center of so much 20th century horror. Maybe we can turn it around and really give the center of the city to the people. And for a while, the people really held on to the center of the city and really kind of ran it through chaos or whatever means. But so it was an interesting time in Berlin at the time of the book and the time when I lived there. And so I try to reflect some of that as well.
Do you think observing, the decades to come, that it was sort of an illusion and it was never going, that prospect of jubilation would never, come to pass?
Yeah, and a place that developed and with that much money on the line. I mean, all this, a few years by the time I was leaving there, the construction cranes had kind of taken over in the center of town, and they were redoing it completely. And they made it very interesting, but they kind of lost that bohemian edge that it had for a few years there. And a lot of the sort of marginalized people who had kind of moved in and could do whatever they want in the center, they were kind of being eased out as well. So it was kind of a brief golden age for the city. And Berlin has had those before. They had this little kind of golden age of Bohemia before the Nazis took over, after the fall of the Weimar Republic and before the Nazis came in. Berlin was a very interesting, edgy place before that was all kind of cleansed out by the Nazis. So it's still a fascinating city. It's still a great place to go and tolerates a lot. It's just a wonderfully chaotic place in a lot of ways, but that was sort of a golden age for it right then.
I mean, that's a fascinating lens on it, not one I would have had. So thank you. So Meg, as intensely collaborative as Heat 2 was, as you've described it, it also must have been just such an artistic, creative endeavor on your part, leaping into these characters. As you said, they've been living in man's mind and have backstories. And can you talk about, what the process for you alone was like, of sort of entering into this world and then making it something new?
Well, yeah, I had to get to know characters who have become indelible through both Michael's writing and filmmaking and such vivid performances in the film. Robert De Niro as Neil McCauley, the master thief, Val Kilmer as Chris Shiherlis, his brother in arms and brother from another mother. Vincent Hanna was Al Pacino's role. So Michael wanted to make sure that I could understand who these people were, really, and see where they had come from, what had shaped them into the people that they become, and how I could kind of rewind them to an earlier stage in their life, younger, perhaps more volatile. Neil, in the early sections, he's not that far out of Folsom Prison. Chris is very young and hot-headed, and he screws up everything in his life, except when he's on the job. On the job, he's sober and lethal and focused and professional. It's just, once he gets home, he's just a total screw up. Hannah, we find out he'd had a terrible tour of duty in Vietnam that won't leave him, and then to figure out how to extrapolate them out into the future and see build on who they'd been, but build them out, up, down. And of course, with the thing with a prequel and a sequel is number one, in a prequel, you need to have such a strong story that will also involve new characters whose fates are uncertain. We know that the characters who in the movie, that they're gonna live through part one, so to speak. So you need to bring in like some really strong, powerful story involving other people that we see that develop dramatically, and the same in the sequel part. So I was delighted to get to bring the old characters back in and to give them new friends, enemies, partners, lovers in all sections of the book. And was talking about collaboration. One thing I want to say that I was delighted with was that Michael had ideas for some, big action sequences in the book, and he let me take a crack at them. And there's that was a pretty fantastic chance to really show my chops and find some more chops and hone those chops and expand them. So it was that was a lot of fun. I also enjoyed really adding some more interesting, strong, capable women to the story. There's some women who kick ass in this book. So
Yeah.
That was a particular delight.
Yeah, I was wondering how much of that, completely new stuff through a different lens that we have now, how much fun that must have been. It sounds like great trust developed between the two of you. Like there was real creative trust involved.
It does, and if I would tell anybody who's collaborated, this, and if you're going to collaborate, that's the most important thing I think that develops. That if you start to you trust each other's skills, you trust each other's intent. You see, each other's dedication and devotion to the project and to the work. And once you develop that, then when it comes to revising or hashing out all those ideas, then you're speaking to a partner whose remarks you can listen to openly. It's not somebody who's just like snarking on you just for the sake of it. If you need to make adjustments, if you need to ditch something, if you need to say it, if someone says this is not landing, it's not there yet, then as long as you trust your partner's writing partner's sense of it, then you have no hesitation in going back in and saying, okay, we're going to find the solution that is right, and we're going to get it there.
Yeah, I think that's true, as a life lesson. Like you have to have that trust to be able to be open to feedback. And it's funny to apply it to the creative endeavor, because you're right. Once you have that, then you really believe that it's about the good of the product that you're, creating together. Thank you. So, Gabino, you mentioned David Joy in something or another that I read, and he's a favorite of mine too. And when I read that from you, I thought of David's last book, which deals with the North Carolina wilderness. And then I sort of thought about Texas and your treatment of it. And I wondered what you would say about setting, just the physical creation of the setting in The Devil Takes You Home.
Setting for me is always, when done well, it's a character on its own. If you take the long history of noir, New York City and LA, for example, are two characters we know very well. A lot of people that I know LA and New York City because we've read so many crime novels set in those two cities. But Texas is very big, and it's very different, and it's a mix of smaller subcultures. And I wanted to bring that into the page. I've been trying to do that for about 3 books now, because it's really weird and it's really magical, and it's we have our problems, and it's not the best state to be a brown or a black person or a woman, but it's unique in some of the things that you see once you step outside of government, in terms of our culture, our food, our language. If you go to places like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, it's a beautiful melting pot, and I wanted to have some of that. We go all the way down to the border. The novel starts in Austin. Austin is not the border, but I worked for 2 years in Austin teaching ESL classes to undocumented workers. So a lot of people tend to focus on the border as where all of it happens. And it's not. It flows north, and it affects the whole state. And I wanted to bring some of that. And I wanted to show what Texas is like for people who are not from Texas. I wanted to see keep exploring the relationship that Texas has to borders, ideological borders, language borders, and physical borders. But then it goes into, religion and culture, and folks who were born in other places learning to adapt. And hopefully I managed to catch, a little bit, a small percentage of that melting pot that is Texas and some of its biggest cities. And like I said, it's a road trip novel in a way. So we go from Austin to San Antonio, from San Antonio down to El Paso, and then from El Paso back to Austin. So for anyone who's done that long drive, which seems very repetitive, I try to celebrate it in a way. So hopefully folks who've been around see the real Texas in there, and folks who haven't, maybe they need to come down and check it out.
No, you did bring out some of the features, and it's funny that you talk about the borders, because there's a borderlessness to it in a way too. And one of those manifestations was the language. I like the borderlessness of the language, and there's different languages in there, and they're not, you know, I think you made this a deliberate choice not to italicize. Did I see that somewhere, that was discussed at some point? Yeah. And I really like that, because it gave it a seamlessness that I think is the lens this country needs right now. So, Dan, I happen to know that there is at least one prospective journalist in the audience. I would love to hear you talk about what the leap from journalist and foreign correspondent to novelist was like, multi-published novelist, and I'd love to hear about that evolution all the way up to and including winter work.
The hardest part of changing was getting used to the idea that you didn't have to be chained to your notebook. I still do a lot of research for these books. In fact, I was lucky with this one in that I went back to Berlin for a week or so in February of 2020. And, you know, about 3 weeks after I got back, everything shut down. But it was hard getting used to the idea that if I was developing a character and I was thinking of him or her in a certain way and a certain age, and then I would reach a few scenes, and the deeper I got into the book, I would sort of realize, wow, it'd be a lot better if this character was really about 10 years younger. And I would think, well, then so make them 10 years younger. You know, it wasn't like this was something that you were going to get sued over if you changed the facts, because they were your facts. So it was hard to kind of take command of scenes. And I think it took me about 3 books before I could really kind of wean myself away from the idea that everything had to be exactly as it was in my research. It's not that I was making up realities. I mean, I was making up my own reality, obviously, but I wasn't changing the sensibility of a place, but I was creating my own characters. I had to get comfortable with my own imagination wandering off into corners where you're just not allowed to do that as a journalist. And so it took some doing, and it took relaxing more than anything when I was writing, and kind of getting into the flow of that and letting myself, freeing myself up to do that. So that was the hardest part of the adjustment, I think.
I think I showed my ignorance of history earlier, but I think your work reads very true. Like, I wouldn't think any of it was really made up just by reading it.
I don't want it to be implausible, and I want it to ring true for, if you're, say, from Berlin, I don't want you to read it and say, this is completely inauthentic. So I'm trying to capture the nature of a place, or the nature of the types of people who live there, and which I think you can only get by going there and observing and spending a fair amount of time there and listening to the way people talk and the way people approach problems. Just to give you one quick example, you go into a restaurant in Berlin, people are pretty quiet, and you know, they're observant of other people's conversations. They don't want to be interrupting them with their noise, as opposed to, say, America, where you go into a restaurant and it's just chaos sometimes, and the noise is unbelievable. And we noticed that, you know, moving back and forth when my wife and I lived there, and then we came back. There are all these different things you notice about the way different countries, different cities approach experiences like dining out or going to a park, or, you know, interacting with each other on mass transit. Little cues like that. Germans will tell you your business. If you're not doing something right, they will be very quick to tell you that you're screwing it up. They will get right in your face and tell you that. Everyone sort of has this police mentality there in that sense, but they're very warm people too. So they're not big on superficial kindness, but once you get to know them, they will do anything for you. So I want to get all of that correct, but yeah, getting used to the idea that can also, it's my job to create. It's my job to use my imagination as much as anything.
To set the scene, yeah. So, okay, it takes a village to create a civil community kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me want to visit Germany. So, Jeff, on Rogue Reads, we frequently discuss series versus standalones, and I would love to, you touched on this. You made a huge 10-year leap. That's a very interesting decision, time-wise. I'd love to hear your thoughts on creating a series, building a character like Sam, and just writing a series and then re-entering the series at a different point in time. Too much?
Well,
Like at 7:54, I can't even believe it, but yeah.
Answer quickly. I mean, I had I wrote the first Sam novel, Adrenaline, at the suggestion of my British editor, who said, I had done 5 or 6 standalones in a row, and he said, would you consider writing a series? And I, created Sam as sort of a suspense hero, but I made him different in some key ways. I made him much younger than sort of the Jack Bauers or the Jason Bournes or the James Bonds, and I didn't give him a JB as an initial. But I made him much younger. I made him somewhat more naive. I gave him a family. A lot of things sometimes these other characters don't have. And then I just sort of thought, well, let's see what happens. I didn't think out. I refer to his universe as the Capraverse because people like to see, readers have asked to see supporting characters brought back. They are interested in the supporting cast that is around him. And there's not room to include everyone in every book. But when I had sort of, after I'd written the 5 original books, I felt I had put him through such an emotional ringer that I felt we needed a break from each other. It would have been like a Stephen King novel if he could have come to life and he would have just beaten the crap out of me for what I had done to him. But then writing the 4 standalones, the suburban suspense, I learned a lot from that. I feel like a lot of what I learned when my publisher said, hey, do you want to write a Sam again? I was like, oh God, do I? Yeah, I do. But, no idea had seemed quite right for him. And then it felt like a lot of the things that I'd learned in writing those standalones, I could sort of apply to bringing Sam back to life. Because it wasn't, sometimes in the books, it was like the original 5 books. Sometimes it was just like almost like immediate sequel, one book ends and the next book starts 5 minutes later, right? And I didn't, but it felt like it to me, even though it wasn't. I was like, let's just take like a deep, deep breath. And what I liked is it also let the supporting cast have their 10 years off, and they're in new situations and they have new opportunities that I don't have to over explain. I can just put them in that dramatic situation. I'll explain it later, right? And so all the terrain had changed. And so it was a frightening thing to do because I thought, well, what if readers are pissed? Or, I've already heard from people like, will there be a summary of the first 5 books at the beginning of? No, there won't. At Traitor's Dance, hopefully I've filled in the backstory as best that I can. But I think, to me, what was always interesting in a series novel, people enjoy the pleasure of the novel is the time you have with that detective. That is why we enjoy Jane Marple or Jack Reacher or Easy Rawlins, because they have an approach to the world and we enjoy spending time with them, and then they solve the mystery, but they don't always necessarily change dramatically. In a standalone, you can throw everything in the kitchen sink emotionally at this character because you're not going to be seeing them again. And this should be the biggest crisis of their life. I tried to blend it a little bit in this because Sam's biggest thing in his life is Daniel. And the thought that Daniel could be negatively impacted or by his work is something that is sort of driving him at a higher level than what we might have seen before, although the books didn't feel like they could fly at a higher level when I was writing them. But that's sort of what I took away from having written a bunch of one and then going back to writing a series. I'm sorry, that was long-winded.
No, that you could almost have the best of both worlds because you could have another peak of danger and disharmony in his life because it had been.
I'm trying to cheat and do that. So
no. I think it came off as not a cheat at all. So thank you. That's a great answer. I cannot believe how fast this show's gone. I really can't. And I thank you all, Gabino and Meg and Jeff and Dan, because making an hour go quickly today for me was a real gift. We could wrap up in one of two ways. I know we have some questions in the chat. And I also said at the very beginning, I hesitate to even throw this out there. You guys can email me with your Discord later. We could have the authors read a very short, like a 1-page, 2-page excerpt if they want to. It's going to be a show of hands on the part of our authors. Raise your hand if you would like to wrap up Rogue Reads with a very short reading segment. If not, we'll take a couple of questions from the chat. And go out on a limb, you guys. If you don't want to, just
I will wrap up by saying if the thing that people should read is all the other panelists' novels, because these Gabino and Jeff and Dan, their books are all fantastic. So
same with yours.
Second, please go out to your local bookstore, your Barnes and Noble, or even online, and please buy Heat 2, Traitor's Dance, Winter Work, The Devil Takes You Home. Order them right now while you're enlivened by this show, because you will have, not even half a week of sheer reading pleasure, and I hope you all will do that. Let me just look in the chat real quick, or Lisa, our tech rogue, do you see maybe just one or two questions we could throw out there from our audience, and then we'll wrap up? Great.
Yes, we had one question. We'll go quick from Meg, where Chris Calvin, who we all know, wrote on Facebook, "Am I the only person who loves thrillers who has somehow not seen Heat? She has her copy of Heat 2. Should she stream the film before she reads the prequel sequel?"
I quickly texted back to the group.
Yeah.
I never discourage anyone from seeing Heat. You can read the novel cold, but it will enrich your reading experience if you have seen the film. I see that Andreas Alambridis also answered that. He's you're here somewhere, Andreas, and recommends seeing the film as well. The characters will pop, they'll come alive, the action will knock you back on your heels, and you'll get a sense of the worlds of a Highline bank robbery crew and a relentless detective, and how they take down a tunnel heist in Heat 2, how they then do what Gabino warned against, which is to take down a cartel stash house. And later Chris escapes to South America, where he has to learn another system. He has to get involved with a crime family and figure out those dynamics, and then it all comes back to Los Angeles. So if you want to see the world of Los Angeles that Heat brings so darkly to sparkling life, you can start there and just keep going, please.
Okay. Then also real quick round robin. I know we could spend like an hour on this, but MP Shea wants to know, what are your specific writing habits on a daily or weekly? How do you discipline yourself every day to write your current book and stick to it?
Oh, that's a great one to end on. Let's go around the authors. Let's start, Jeff. I'm looking right at you, so we'll start with Jeff and go around. That's a great one.
I try to write 2,000 words a day when I'm drafting, and I do it by word count. And I can't be working on another book. I have to work on that one. So,
yeah.
Great. Dan?
Mornings. Mornings are my most productive time, and it takes me forever to write the first 1/4 of a book, probably 6 months. And then I write the next 3/4 over the next 3 to 4 months, because once I'm deeply involved and familiar with the characters and the scenes, it accelerates and my work days get longer and longer and longer. And basically by the time I'm about midway through, it's the last thing I think about before bed, the first thing I think of when I wake up. I get up in the middle of the night, write things down. By about the halfway point, I'm thoroughly obsessed with every character in the book.
Interesting. Gabino?
I rely on the sensation of panic and coffee. I have a deadline, and whenever, wherever, some days it doesn't happen, and sometimes I have really good days. I know that's not very useful for other writers, but
Panic
right now, I'm in a hotel, so instead of turning on the TV, I'll write later, whenever and wherever it works for me.
So induce a state of panic and brew a pot of coffee. I love it. Meg?
I would be a mashup of all the other three. I've trained myself to do 2,000 words a day when I'm drafting, and that's because I know how long it takes me to write. That if I want to write a novel in a year, I have to actually get words down on the page because I can fix them later. So I spew it out and then come back and fix it. I used to, when I was teaching and little kids, I would write on the weekends for several years. I knew exactly when I had to stop for the day because the school bus pulled up at the corner at 3:47 p.m. and that everything had to be done before then. Now my kids are out of school and I write until dinner time generally.
Well, thank you. Those are great responses. I want to say thank you to Rogue Lisa Black for handling the tech on this night, which has been such a special evening. Thank you, Meg Gardiner and GABINO IGLESIAS and Jeff Abbott and Dan Fesperman for sharing your wisdom and your wit and your books. Please order and get these wonderful new novels at the top of your pile right now. And please join us next month on Rogue Reads, September 19th. We're going to do something never before happened on Rogue Reads, which I will share for a surprise that night, but I believe the show is September 19th, and you'll get to see Scott Turow and William Kent Kruger and a couple of other wonderful guests. And just thank you all to the authors. I really have had a great time, and I hope you have too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Definitely.
Thanks for being such a
Thank
wonderful
you.
interviewer, and thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks to
Thank
both of you.
you.